They thought he was crazy when the farmer bought a rusted train, but his next move left everyone speechless. They all thought he was crazy. The farmer, known for his quiet ways and simple life, had just purchased an old rusted train, a relic of a time long gone. People whispered behind his back, making jokes and shaking their heads. A train? A broken, decrepit piece of history that hadn't moved in decades. They were sure he had lost his mind. But when he fired up that engine for the first time, nobody was laughing anymore. In fact, they couldn't believe their eyes. What he did with that rusted locomotive would not only change the town forever, but would also reveal a side of him they never knew existed. It was a story of grit, vision, and the kind of courage that most people only dream of. Want to see how one man's simple dream turned into a revolution? Hit that follow button to find out what happens next. The town of Hollow Creek was small, nestled between rolling hills and sprawling farms. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the biggest events were birthdays, harvest festivals, and the occasional town hall meeting. For most of the people in Hollow Creek, life was predictable, ordinary, and comfortable. They woke up at the same time every day, did their work, and went to bed, never questioning the routine. But there was one person who didn't quite fit in. His name was Sam, and to the people of Hollow Creek, he was just the farmer. He didn't have much to say, mostly kept to himself, and spent his days working the land in silence. His small farm was all he needed, and people respected that. He was humble, quiet, and lived a life that was in stark contrast to the bustle of the city. So, when Sam showed up one day with a strange look in his eye and a piece of paper in hand, no one knew what to make of it. He'd made a deal for something that no one had expected. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd find in the pages of a farming catalog. Sam had just purchased a train, a rusted, broken down locomotive that had been sitting in a scrapyard for decades, long forgotten by the world. No one could understand why he would want such a thing. The people of Hollow Creek laughed behind his back, asking each other what he was thinking. Some even said he must have gone mad. "Did you hear?" said Martha, the baker, shaking her head as she rolled dough for her afternoon batch of bread. "Sam bought a train, a rusty old thing, I'm telling you. I wonder if he's finally lost it." "I saw it," replied Henry, the blacksmith, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's nothing more than scrap metal. But I guess that's Sam for you. Always a little off the rails, if you ask me." Even the kids on the street had their fun with it, pretending to steer imaginary trains and laughing whenever they saw Sam walking through town, as if he had become the punchline of a joke that no one wanted to explain. But Sam wasn't laughing. In fact, he seemed more focused than ever. He spent weeks in his barn, away from prying eyes, working on the locomotive, getting it back into some semblance of life. The townspeople would see him late at night, welding, hammering, and tinkering with parts that nobody could identify. Some of them were even curious enough to sneak a glance, but no one dared approach him. "Why's he doing it?" asked Robert, the sheriff, one evening as he watched Sam from the diner window. "It's just a pile of junk." "I don't know," replied Lucy, the waitress, shaking her head. "But it's not like him to spend so much time on something like that. Maybe he really has lost it." Days passed, and the buzz around town grew louder. More and more people started to gossip about the train, about Sam's obsession with it. No one could understand what he was trying to do. Some wondered if he was secretly building some kind of monument to himself, while others joked that he was just trying to relive some childhood dream. They couldn't have been more wrong. One evening, just as the sun began to set, the sound of a horn echoed through the valley. It was distant at first, then growing louder. The people of Hollow Creek paused in their tracks, unsure of what was happening. The streets fell silent as the noise approached, and then, just as quickly as it had begun, the sound stopped. A few seconds later, a great rumble shook the earth beneath their feet. The ground vibrated, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. It was unmistakable, the sound of a train. The people of Hollow Creek ran to their windows, rushing outside to see what was going on. And there it was, the locomotive, Sam's locomotive. It wasn't perfect, far from it, in fact. The train was still covered in rust, the paint peeling away, and the wheels creaked with each revolution. But there it was, rolling down the tracks that hadn't seen a train in years, and it was moving, powered by an engine Sam had somehow revived against all odds. But it wasn't just a train, it was a symbol of something bigger than Hollow Creek had ever imagined. The townspeople stood in awe as the train rumbled by them, pulling itself forward with a strength they never thought possible. The next day, the town was abuzz. Everyone gathered at the diner, spilling out onto the sidewalks, exchanging stories and theories about Sam's locomotive. Some still couldn't believe what they had seen. They had thought it was just some kind of illusion, but the dust and the noise were real. The train was no joke. What in the world was that? Robert, the sheriff, asked, still trying to wrap his mind around it. I thought for sure it was some kind of prank. You saw it too, right? Henry, the blacksmith, said, almost incredulously. It moved. It was alive. They all nodded, exchanging looks of disbelief. They had all grown up hearing stories about the old train tracks that had once connected Hollow Creek to the larger towns beyond. But the tracks had been abandoned years ago, after the town's economy had shifted away from the railroad. The trains had stopped running, and the tracks had fallen into disrepair. It was just another part of history forgotten by time. No one had expected a thing like this to happen, but Sam wasn't just a farmer. He had always had something more inside him, something that no one had noticed. People had seen his quiet ways and assumed he was simple, but now it was clear. There was more to Sam than they had ever realized. How did he do it? Martha whispered to Henry as they watched Sam pass by the diner on foot. His hands were covered in grease, his face still streaked with the work of the day before. He seemed calm, almost peaceful, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Sam glanced at the crowd gathered around the diner, but he didn't stop. He didn't acknowledge their stares, their whispers. He simply kept walking, heading toward his farm. I've heard he worked at the factory once, Henry said, leaning in. I wonder if that's where he learned about engines. That's a rumor, nothing more, Robert replied, his voice skeptical. But even if he did know a thing or two about engines, it's a miracle he brought that train back to life. It's beyond me. The people continued to talk, but no one had an answer. Sam wasn't saying anything. He was letting the train do the talking for him. Over the next few days, the town continued to watch in awe as Sam worked tirelessly on the locomotive. The sound of hammering, welding, and clanking metal became a constant in the town, and the more they saw, the more questions piled up. The townspeople were still skeptical, but something in their hearts began to stir. Could this really be happening? Could this old, rusted train truly be the key to something bigger? Then came the day when Sam's true plan started to unfold. It wasn't just about the train, it never had been. Sam wasn't just trying to restore a piece of history. He wasn't trying to show off or prove anything. No, Sam had something far grander in mind. That morning, just after dawn, Sam gathered the town's few remaining train enthusiasts, a small but passionate group who had once been the dreamers of Hollow Creek, the ones who remembered the days when the trains had first come through. He stood in front of the locomotive, now polished and gleaming under the morning light. "I need your help," Sam said, his voice steady but full of purpose. "We're going to do more than just restore this train. We're going to bring the town back to life. We're going to bring this railroad back to the people of Hollow Creek." The crowd fell silent. Nobody said a word. It wasn't what they had expected. They had assumed Sam would sell the train for scrap, or maybe turn it into some kind of oddity for tourists. But this was different. This was a vision. Sam continued, his eyes shining with conviction. "We can't rely on the city for jobs or the factory anymore. The railroad used to connect us to the outside world, and we're going to rebuild it. It's going to take all of us, but if we work together, we can bring Hollow Creek back to life." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You want to rebuild the whole railroad?" Robert asked, incredulous. "But the tracks have been abandoned for decades. It'll take a fortune." "It's not about the money," Sam said simply. "It's about giving the people something to believe in again." The crowd remained still, processing what Sam had said. Some were doubtful, but others, the dreamers, the ones who had always believed in Hollow Creek's potential, felt a spark of hope. And then, as if to solidify his words, Sam climbed into the locomotive. The townspeople watched in stunned silence as the engine roared to life once more. The train, which had been nothing but rust and decay, now hummed with power. Sam's eyes gleamed as he shouted over the noise, "This train will carry us forward. It'll carry the town forward." For the next few weeks, the mood in Hollow Creek shifted. It wasn't just the excitement about the train, it was the air of possibility that hung over the town like a fog, something no one had felt in years. The townspeople, once resigned to the slow decay of their once thriving community, began to see Sam in a new light. The rusted train wasn't just a piece of machinery, it was a symbol of hope, a dream that, for the first time in decades, felt attainable. Sam's vision started to take shape. He knew rebuilding the railroad wouldn't be easy, but the first thing he did was gather a group of people willing to help. They came from all walks of life, from the mechanic who had worked in the garage for years to the retired engineer who had once worked on trains in a nearby city. There were farmers, factory workers, and even a few young people who had grown up in the town and left for bigger cities, but were now starting to wonder if Hollow Creek might hold something more than just memories. Sam was careful with his words. He never promised anyone riches or a glamorous future. Instead, he talked about the power of community. He spoke of the pride that came from working together, from seeing something as broken as an old locomotive come back to life, from knowing that they had built something meaningful from the ground up. "We're not just fixing a train," he would tell them. "We're fixing the spirit of this town. We're giving it a future." The first day they worked together, the people were unsure. The train itself was a beast of rust and oil stains, its wheels frozen in place, its engine seized up. It seemed like an impossible task. But Sam had a way of making things seem possible, even when logic told him otherwise. He didn't just delegate the work, he was there, in the trenches with everyone else. He led by example, fixing gears and replacing broken parts, his hands rough from hours of labor. He had an uncanny ability to inspire confidence in others, making even the most skeptical believe that they could actually do this. "Hey, Sam," Henry the blacksmith said one morning as he hammered away at a metal plate. "You really think this is gonna work?" Sam wiped the sweat off his brow, looking over at the train. "I don't just think it will work. I know it will." There was a fire in his eyes that day, and it spread through the workers. Slowly, piece by piece, the train began to take shape. The engine roared back to life. The tracks, once overgrown with weeds and forgotten, were cleared and repaired. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy, but each day brought new progress. By the end of the month, the train was nearly ready. The rust was gone, replaced by polished metal. The wheels were oiled and smooth. The engine purred like a living thing. And the people of Hollow Creek, they were no longer just watching from the sidelines. They were part of something bigger than themselves. Their town, their home, was coming back to life. But as the train neared completion, the skeptics started to speak up. They had watched Sam's progress with a mixture of awe and doubt, but now, as the end of the project loomed near, they couldn't help but wonder, what next? Sure, the train was restored, but what was Sam planning to do with it? What was the ultimate goal? One evening, Robert, the sheriff, called Sam over as he was working on the engine. "You've done a lot, Sam," Robert began, scratching his chin. "I'll admit, I didn't think it was possible, but now that the train's almost ready, what's your end game here? You can't honestly expect this train to start running again, can you?" Sam paused, wiping his hands on a rag. He turned to face Robert, his expression calm but determined. "The train isn't just a train," Sam said quietly. "It's the heart of this town. If we can get this train running again, it'll connect us to the outside world. It'll bring business. It'll bring opportunity. And more than anything, it'll bring people together." Robert raised an eyebrow. "You really think people will come back for a train? This town's been dead for years. No one's gonna pay attention to some old tracks." "You're wrong," Sam replied, his voice firm. "The train isn't just a link to the outside world. It's a symbol. When people see it running, they'll know that Hollow Creek is alive again, and people will come. They'll want to be a part of it." As if to prove his point, Sam's vision began to unfold before everyone's eyes. Word of the resurrected train spread beyond the town limits. First, it was just a few curious tourists, people who had heard about the project and wanted to see it for themselves. But soon, there were more. People from nearby towns, local businesses, and even people who had moved away years ago started to return. The excitement was palpable. The town that had once been on the verge of fading into history was suddenly buzzing with life again. The old train station, once abandoned and forgotten, was now filled with people coming and going, workers restoring the platform, and tourists snapping pictures. But the real turning point came when the first official run of the train was scheduled. It wasn't just a test run, it was a statement. Hollow Creek was back, and the world needed to see it. The day of the run, people from all over the region gathered to watch. There were speeches, cheers, and even a few tears. The sun was setting as Sam climbed aboard the locomotive, the people of Hollow Creek standing behind him, watching in awe. The sound of the horn echoed through the valley once more, but this time it wasn't just a train on tracks. It was a symbol of hope, of resilience, of everything Hollow Creek had once been and was now becoming again. As the train slowly pulled away from the station, the crowd erupted in applause. The locomotive, which had once been nothing but rust and decay, now carried with it the spirit of the town. It was no longer just a machine, it was the embodiment of a new beginning. The first official run of the train marked a turning point for Hollow Creek. It wasn't just a train that had come back to life, but the town itself. People were starting to believe in Sam's vision, and the once forgotten community was awakening from its long slumber. As the train steamed down the tracks, the sound of its horn echoed through the valley, signaling something more than just the return of a locomotive. It was a message that Hollow Creek was no longer on the brink of collapse. This was a town with a future, a town that was willing to fight for it. The train had become a symbol of the town's rebirth. It wasn't just about the practical benefits of transportation or the economic opportunities it might bring. It was about the courage to rebuild, to take something that had been left for dead and breathe new life into it. But as the months passed, the challenges didn't stop. The town's economy was slowly growing, but there were still many obstacles. The tracks, though repaired, were old and fragile in places. The train was running, yes, but it was fragile too. They needed to make sure it could run smoothly over longer distances, and that meant more work, more repairs, more resources. But Sam, as always, was unshaken. He was determined to make it work, not just for himself, but for everyone in Hollow Creek. The influx of people, both curious and hopeful, had given the town a burst of energy. Businesses that had long been empty were now reopening. People were investing in the town, fixing up their homes, and starting new ventures. Sam's dream had started a ripple effect, and it was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. Yet there was one thing that still loomed over Hollow Creek: doubt. Not from the townspeople, but from outside forces. Some of the larger cities and regional businessmen saw the revival of Hollow Creek as a threat. They were comfortable with the status quo, with people depending on the bigger cities for their work and supplies. Hollow Creek, a small town without much industry or infrastructure, wasn't supposed to be thriving. They didn't like the idea of a small, rural town becoming self-sufficient. It was bad for business. One late afternoon, Sam received a letter. The envelope was thick, official looking, and stamped with a city emblem he recognized. He knew what it was before he even opened it. He had been expecting it. It was a notice from the city council, a warning that the revival of Hollow Creek's railroad was infringing on the regional transportation plans. They were giving him an ultimatum: either stop running the train or face legal action. They claimed the tracks were no longer registered for commercial use, and that they would not allow the small town to operate a railroad without meeting strict regulations and codes. Sam's heart sank as he read the letter. This wasn't just a roadblock. This was a direct challenge to everything he had fought for. It was an attack on the dream he had built with his own hands, and it felt like all the progress the town had made was hanging in the balance. It wasn't just about the train anymore. It was about the very essence of Hollow Creek, its right to grow, to rebuild, and to reclaim its future. He knew this was coming, but it didn't make it any easier to face. That evening, Sam stood at the edge of the train tracks, staring out at the locomotive parked under the dimming sky. He wasn't sure what to do next. The weight of the town's hopes rested on his shoulders, and the thought of giving up was unbearable. But the legal battle would be a tough one. The city had resources, lawyers, and power. What did a small town like Hollow Creek have? A dream? A train? But Sam wasn't one to back down. He had fought for this town before, and he wasn't gonna stop now. The next morning, Sam called a town meeting. The hall was packed, everyone eager to hear what he had to say. He stood before them, the letter from the city council in his hands. "They've sent us an ultimatum," Sam began, his voice steady. "They want us to stop running the train or we'll face legal action." The room fell silent. This was the moment they had all been dreading. But Sam's tone remained calm. "We knew this wouldn't be easy, but we can't give up now. We've come too far to let them take this away from us." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. They were with him. They had to be. The train had given them hope, and they weren't going to lose that hope without a fight. "We're not just fighting for a train," Sam continued, his eyes scanning the room. "We're fighting for our future, for the people of this town, for our right to decide what happens here. We built this together, and we're not going to let anyone take it from us." The room erupted in applause. The people were ready to fight, and so was Sam. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, legal consultations, and town hall discussions. Sam, with the help of the community, rallied support from neighboring towns, businesses, and even some regional lawmakers who had heard about Hollow Creek's story. They began gathering evidence, not just about the railroad, but about the town's history, its economy, and the undeniable fact that Hollow Creek was alive again. They weren't just trying to operate a train, they were revitalizing an entire community. Finally, the day of the court hearing arrived. The entire town gathered in the courtroom, their eyes focused on Sam, who stood before the judge. It felt as though the weight of the town's future rested on this moment. The lawyer representing the city council presented their case first. They argued that the railroad, though once vital, was now a liability. They claimed that it was a public safety issue, that the train was outdated and dangerous. They painted Hollow Creek as a small town clinging to the past, out of touch with modern needs. But when Sam's turn came, he stepped forward with a quiet confidence. "This town has been through a lot," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We've been knocked down, but we've always gotten back up, and now we're building something new, something that will benefit not just us, but the entire region. We're not asking for permission to stay stuck in the past. We're asking for the right to build our future." He didn't mention the train. He didn't need to. He talked about hope, about community, about resilience. The judge listened in silence, and then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "The court recognizes the efforts of Hollow Creek and its people. The town has demonstrated a commitment to revitalization, and the train is clearly part of that effort. I will grant a temporary injunction, allowing the railroad to continue operating while further assessments are made. This is not just about a train, it's about what this town represents." The crowd erupted in cheers. The legal battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time in weeks, Sam felt like they had won. It was a small victory, but it was enough to keep the dream alive. And as Sam stood there, Watching the crowd celebrate, he knew that this was only the beginning. The train wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a movement. A movement that would carry Hollow Creek forward into a future they had once thought impossible. The victory in court was only the beginning. Though they had won the right to keep the train running, Sam knew that the hardest part was still ahead. The city council wasn't going to back down that easily. The battle had shifted from the courtroom to the heart of the town, and Sam was determined not to let the dream he had built slip through his fingers. The next few months were tense. The legal teams from the city and the state started scrutinizing every inch of Hollow Creek's railroad. Every track, every bolt, every piece of machinery was examined with the cold precision of officials who didn't understand what the train meant to the people of the town. It was no longer just about transportation, it was about the soul of Hollow Creek. Sam, however, wasn't deterred. He knew the stakes, and his resolve had only hardened. He called the town together once more, determined to give them the strength to keep fighting. "We've been tested before," Sam said, standing before the people in the town hall. His voice was calm, but filled with fire. "And we've always come out stronger. Now is no different. The road ahead may be tough, but if we stand together, there's nothing we can't overcome." The people of Hollow Creek, who had once watched the train as mere spectators, were now united in a common purpose. They were no longer just working on a train. They were working to protect their future. Sam's words had ignited something in them. It was no longer just about restoring a piece of history. It was about making sure their children, their grandchildren, and future generations had something to hold on to. Over the coming weeks, the town rallied behind Sam with an energy that surprised even him. People volunteered their time, labor, and resources to improve the train's infrastructure. The factory workers started producing parts for the train, while local businesses chipped in to cover the costs. Even the kids who had once laughed at the idea of a crazy farmer with a broken train found ways to help, painting signs, running errands, or simply spreading the word. They were no longer just fighting for a train, they were fighting for something bigger, the pride and dignity of their town and the future they were determined to build. As the pressure mounted, Sam felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. There were days when he felt like he was carrying the entire town's future on his back, and the strain was beginning to show. His hands, once steady and sure, trembled slightly as he worked on the engine. His mind, which had once been clear and focused, now raced with concerns. What if the city's officials found another way to shut them down? What if they ran out of resources? What if, after all their hard work, it wasn't enough? It was one evening, after a long day of repairs, when Sam stood in the field near the tracks, looking out over the rolling hills of Hollow Creek. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. He could feel the cool breeze on his face, and for a moment, the weight of the world lifted from his shoulders. He wasn't alone. Martha, the town baker, walked up beside him, her hands still covered in flour from the day's work. She had been with him from the beginning, offering him words of encouragement when others doubted him. Now she stood beside him as an ally, a friend and a fellow believer in the dream they were trying to make real. "How's it going?" she asked quietly, watching him gaze out at the train. Sam sighed, wiping his brow. "It's getting harder. We're running out of time and resources. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up." Martha placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've come this far, Sam. We've all come this far. You didn't do this alone. None of us did. And we're not going to stop now." Her words were a balm to his weary spirit. He had always been the one to keep pushing forward, but now he understood that it wasn't just his dream anymore. The people of Hollow Creek had invested themselves in this vision, and it was their dream too. They had built something together, something that no city or corporation could take away. "You're right," Sam said softly, his voice filled with gratitude. "This is bigger than me. This is bigger than the train. This is about who we are and who we're going to be." The following week, the town held its most significant meeting yet. It was no longer just about whether or not the train would operate. It was about standing their ground and making sure Hollow Creek remained a place of opportunity, pride, and resilience. They were going to send a message, not only to the city, but to the world. Hollow Creek was not going to fade into obscurity. Sam and the townspeople devised a bold plan. They would hold a grand event, a celebration of the train, of the town, and of their triumph over adversity. The event would be more than just a parade or a ceremony. It would be a showcase of everything they had accomplished. They would invite neighboring towns, businesses, and even media outlets. The idea was to make sure everyone knew what Hollow Creek had become. The day of the event arrived, and the town was transformed. The streets were lined with banners and flags. The train station, once dilapidated and forgotten, was now filled with life and energy. The air buzzed with excitement as people gathered from all around to see the revived locomotive in action. Children ran through the streets, their faces full of wonder. Old-timers who had never thought they'd see the day that the train would run again gathered around in disbelief, sharing stories of the past with anyone who would listen. As the sun set, Sam climbed aboard the locomotive once more. This time, he wasn't alone. His entire town stood behind him, watching as the train powered up and began its journey down the tracks. The horn sounded, louder and prouder than ever before. The crowd erupted in cheers as the train steamed down the tracks, a symbol of everything they had worked for, everything they had dreamed of. Hollow Creek was alive again, and as the train disappeared into the distance, Sam smiled. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. They had reclaimed their place in the world, and they were going to keep building together. The grand event had been a success beyond anyone's expectations. As the train disappeared into the distance, the townspeople of Hollow Creek stood together, arms around each other, watching it fade into the horizon. The cheers, the laughter, and the excitement still echoed in their hearts. But Sam knew that the real work was only just beginning. The celebration was a moment of triumph, but the future of Hollow Creek still hung in the balance. In the weeks that followed, the town's newfound fame spread. News outlets from nearby cities and even some national networks started covering the story of the resurrected train and the miracle that had taken place in Hollow Creek. The media was calling it a modern-day miracle, a tale of resilience and hope that inspired people far and wide. Sam was featured in interviews, and the townspeople began to feel a growing sense of pride in what they had accomplished. They weren't just a forgotten town anymore. They were a beacon of possibility, a living testament to what could be achieved when a community worked together. But with the attention came challenges. The city council wasn't pleased. The success of Hollow Creek's revival threatened their control over the region. The train, once seen as a quaint piece of history, was now becoming a symbol of defiance. The message was clear. The town was no longer willing to be part of the status quo, and for those who had spent years holding power over the smaller communities, that was unacceptable. One morning, Sam received a phone call that he wasn't expecting. It was from an attorney representing a consortium of regional business interests. The message was simple but heavy. They were interested in buying the train, the tracks, and the entire project. They wanted to control the railroad, which they saw as a valuable asset. The price they offered was enough to change the lives of everyone in Hollow Creek, but at a cost. Sam knew that if he sold, the town would lose its independence. The dream of a self-sustained, thriving Hollow Creek would be nothing more than a commodity, something owned by distant, faceless corporations. Sam didn't hesitate. He refused the offer. "This is not for sale," he said firmly, "not at any price." But the offer was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the pressure on Hollow Creek increased. City officials, business leaders, and even a few influential investors started pushing harder, using every tactic in the book to force Sam into a deal. They tried to undermine the town's progress, claiming that the railroad was unsafe, that it wasn't up to code, and that the town was a liability. They started filing lawsuits, demanding that the town meet strict safety standards that would have cost millions, money the town didn't have. It was a battle on all fronts. Sam was no longer just fighting for the survival of the train. He was fighting for the very future of Hollow Creek. The dream of independence, of a town built on the sweat and vision of its people, was now at risk of being crushed by outside interests who didn't care about the community, only about profits. The people of Hollow Creek, however, weren't about to back down. They had come too far. They had worked too hard. They had built something beautiful, something that couldn't be bought. They weren't going to let it go without a fight. One evening, Sam called another town meeting. The hall was packed, just like before, but this time, there was an intensity in the air that hadn't been there before. The stakes had never been higher. "We've been through a lot already," Sam began, his voice steady, but filled with the weight of everything that was happening. "We've rebuilt this town with our own hands, and now they're trying to take it from us. They want to take everything we've worked for and turn it into a profit for themselves." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what Sam was talking about. The pressure was mounting. They could feel it in their bones. "But I'm not going to let that happen," Sam continued, his eyes sweeping the room. "We've come too far, and we're not going to let anyone take our future from us. We built this together, and we're going to protect it together." The crowd erupted in applause. The energy in the room shifted. There was a new sense of determination in the air. It was the same fire that had sparked the train's revival, the same spirit that had carried them through all the hardships. They weren't going to let anyone take that from them. Sam's plan was simple but powerful. They would rally the surrounding towns, the businesses, and the people who had supported them. They would fight back, not just in court, but with the sheer force of their collective will. They would show the world that Hollow Creek wasn't for sale. They would prove that a community could be more than just a commodity. They could be a force that couldn't be bought or broken. The battle that followed was fierce. The town rallied behind Sam, organizing protests, filing legal defenses, and speaking out at town halls and public meetings. Word spread quickly, and soon the fight for Hollow Creek became a regional cause. The people weren't just fighting for a train anymore. They were fighting for the future of small towns everywhere. The idea that they could build something better for themselves without being pushed around by powerful outside interests. The court dates came and went, each one feeling like a test of their resolve. But in the end, the tide began to turn in their favor. The public outcry was too great. Local support for Hollow Creek's independence grew, and the corporate interests that had tried to take over the town started to back down. Sam's message had resonated with people. The fight wasn't just about a railroad. It was about the right to control their own destiny. After months of legal battles, protests, and organizing, the final ruling came in. The court ruled in favor of Hollow Creek, affirming the town's right to operate the railroad independently. The city's demands were dismissed, and the train was officially protected under new local ordinances that ensured its future and the town's continued growth. The victory was sweet, but it wasn't just a legal win that mattered. It was the realization that Hollow Creek had done the impossible. They had stood up to powerful forces and won, not with wealth or influence, but with unity, determination, and a shared vision. As the train steamed down the tracks once more, the people of Hollow Creek stood at the station, watching with pride. Sam, standing at the front of the train, smiled to himself. He had fought for the town, and now the town was free. The dust had barely settled after Hollow Creek's victory, but the sense of triumph was palpable. The court ruling was a victory not just for Sam, but for every single person in the town who had poured their heart and soul into the project. They had done what no one thought was possible. They had taken back control of their future. But as Sam stood there, watching the train leave the station, he couldn't help but think that this was only one chapter of a much larger story. Hollow Creek wasn't just a train. It wasn't just about preserving the past or proving the world wrong. It was about something more, something that would define the future of the town for generations to come. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. The town was no longer just surviving, it was thriving. The train had connected Hollow Creek to the outside world in a way they had never imagined. Businesses were booming. Visitors were coming from all over, eager to see the miracle town for themselves. The train, once an abandoned relic, had now become the symbol of Hollow Creek's resilience, of a town that refused to fade into history. But for Sam, the work was far from over. There were still hurdles to overcome. The railroad needed to be expanded and modernized. The town needed to grow, but it needed to grow in a way that kept its identity intact. Sam knew that the key to Hollow Creek's future was balance, honoring the past while looking toward the future. It wouldn't be easy, but with the community behind him, he felt more confident than ever. One afternoon, Sam stood on the platform, looking out at the train tracks. He had spent countless hours working on the train, getting it running again, restoring the old equipment, and fighting against the odds. But now, he was starting to think about what came next. What would Hollow Creek look like 5 years from now? 10 years? What kind of town would they be? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. He turned to see Martha walking toward him, a smile on her face as always. "Another day, another victory?" she asked, teasing him lightly. Sam chuckled. "I suppose, but victory doesn't last forever. We've got to keep pushing forward. We've got a lot of work ahead of us if we're going to build something that lasts." Martha's smile faded, and she looked at him with a knowing expression. "You're always thinking ahead, but you've done something amazing here, Sam. Hollow Creek has come back from the brink. You've shown everyone that we can do anything when we work together." Sam paused, glancing at the train rolling down the tracks. He didn't take the credit for the town's success. He couldn't. It had been a collective effort. The town had worked together to rebuild not just a train, but their community, their sense of identity, and their belief in the future. "I didn't do it alone," he said, his voice quiet. "This town did it. Every person who picked up a hammer, every person who worked on the tracks, every person who believed in this dream, they did it." Martha looked at him, her expression softening. "You gave them the vision. You gave them the hope they needed." Sam shook his head. "I just showed them what was possible." But deep down, Sam knew that he couldn't have done it without her, without all the people who had supported him from the start. They had given him the strength to keep going, to keep fighting when the world seemed against him. As they stood there, the train slowing to a stop at the station, Sam realized something. Hollow Creek had never been about the train. It had never been about the engine or the tracks or even the town's revival. It had been about something deeper. It was about people. It was about what happens when a community comes together and refuses to give up. As the town continued to grow, Sam's focus began to shift. The train wasn't just a means of transportation anymore. It was the heartbeat of the town, a way for the people of Hollow Creek to connect with the world. But it was also something that could be shared, something that could inspire others, just as it had inspired Hollow Creek. He began to think bigger. Maybe this wasn't just a story for the people of Hollow Creek. Maybe it was a story that could inspire other towns, other communities to do the same. Maybe the revival of the train was just the first step in something larger, something that could spread hope and strength to other places that had been forgotten. Sam had a vision, a network of small towns and communities that were connected not just by railroads, but by shared values, by the belief that they could build something better for themselves. If Hollow Creek could do it, maybe others could too. One evening, Sam gathered a few of the town's leaders in the diner, including Martha, Robert, and Henry. They sat around the table discussing the future of the town, and Sam laid out his idea. "What if we didn't stop here?" Sam asked. "What if we could help other towns like us? What if we could start a movement, son, a network of small towns, each with their own vision, their own hopes, working together to build something bigger than any one of us?" Martha raised an eyebrow. "You want to take the fight for Hollow Creek to other towns?" "Not just the fight," Sam said, his voice full of conviction. "I want to help them rebuild. I want to show them that they don't have to rely on the cities, that they can build something on their own, that they can have hope again. We've proven it works here. Why can't it work elsewhere?" The room fell silent as everyone took in Sam's words. For a moment, it felt as though the weight of the idea was too much, too big for a small town like Hollow Creek to carry. But then, one by one, the others began to nod. They had seen what Sam had done. They had seen how far they had come, and they knew that it wasn't just a dream, it was a reality. "Let's do it," Robert said, breaking the silence. "Let's show the world what we're capable of." The others nodded, and just like that, Sam's vision was born. The decision to extend Hollow Creek's spirit of revival to other towns was not made lightly. It was bold, ambitious, and to some downright audacious. But to Sam and the people of Hollow Creek, it felt like the natural next step. They had proven that a small town could rise from the ashes and rebuild itself, and now it was time to help others do the same. The first step was to start small. Sam reached out to neighboring towns, some of which had long been forgotten or left behind by larger cities. He shared the story of Hollow Creek, explaining how they had rebuilt their railroad, their businesses, and their hope. The response was overwhelming. Local leaders, business owners, and community organizers from places like Maple Springs, Ridgeview, and Brooksville started reaching out, asking how they could implement the same changes in their towns. They were inspired, but they were also cautious. They had heard stories of failed projects, of grand promises that led nowhere. They didn't want to get their hopes up only to be let down. But Sam, now armed with the success of Hollow Creek as proof, wasn't deterred. He set up meetings in each of these towns, visiting them personally to share his vision. He didn't just talk about what had happened in Hollow Creek. He showed them. He walked them through the process, explaining the struggles, the setbacks, and the triumphs. He made it clear that rebuilding a community was no easy task, but it was possible, and most importantly, it was worth it. It didn't take long for the idea to gain traction. Slowly, the movement began to take shape. The people who had once felt forgotten started to believe that they too could build something meaningful. With each town that joined the cause, Hollow Creek's impact grew. Sam's vision for a network of resilient, self-sustaining communities began to crystallize. But while the movement was gaining momentum, it wasn't without its challenges. Not every town was ready to take the leap. Some were still hesitant, paralyzed by years of neglect and the weight of their own doubts. There were those who feared the hard work would be in vain, that the odds were too great, that they were too far gone. In one of these towns, Brooksville, Sam encountered some of the toughest resistance yet. The town had seen better days, but those days felt long gone. The streets were empty, the stores were boarded up, and most of the younger generation had already moved to the city, leaving behind only those who had grown too tired to leave. When Sam arrived in Brooksville, he was met by an aging mayor, a man named Frank, who was skeptical of Sam's approach. "We've been struggling here for decades," Frank told Sam when they met in the town hall. "People have tried everything. Railroads, factories, tourism. Nothing works. What makes you think Hollow Creek's success can be replicated here?" Sam looked Frank in the eyes, not with arrogance, but with conviction. "I'm not here to promise you that it will be easy, Frank. I'm here to show you that it's possible. But you're right. It's not going to be a quick fix. It's going to take time. It's going to take grit. But it starts with believing that you can change." Frank shook his head, still unconvinced. "Belief doesn't put food on the table, Sam. You can't just wish for things to get better." "No," Sam replied, his voice steady. "But belief gives you the strength to start, to take the first step. You don't have to know how it will end. You just have to know that you can start." The mayor was quiet for a long moment, then looked at the window at the empty streets. He had seen the decline of Brooksville firsthand, and he wasn't sure he could bear to watch it slip further. But as he looked back at Sam, something shifted in his expression. Maybe it was the conviction in Sam's voice, or maybe it was the simple truth of what Sam was saying. "All right," Frank finally said. "We'll try, but it won't be easy." Sam smiled. "Nothing worth having ever is." And so, with the reluctant but growing support of Brooksville's leadership, Sam and a team of volunteers from Hollow Creek set to work. The first thing they did was clean up. The streets, once overrun with weeds and trash, were tidied. The abandoned buildings were given a fresh coat of paint. They didn't have the money or resources to completely overhaul the town, but they had the drive. They had the determination to make it better, little by little. As the days passed, something unexpected began to happen. People started to notice. Some of the town's residents, many of whom had lost hope, began to take part in the cleanup efforts. They swept the sidewalks. They helped rebuild the old train station. It was nothing extraordinary at first, just small steps, but it was progress. And for the first time in a long time, the people of Brooksville were starting to believe that change was possible. One morning, as Sam walked through the town, he saw something that made his heart swell. A group of young people who had been some of the most reluctant to get involved were outside fixing up the old train car that had sat in the yard for years, gathering rust. They were laughing, working together, their hands covered in grease, their faces lit with energy. A few weeks later, when Sam returned to Hollow Creek, he received a letter from Mayor Frank. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "We've taken the first step," it read. "We've cleaned up the main street. We've painted the old station. And just last night, we saw a few people who'd left Brooksville come back. It's not much, but it's a start." Sam smiled as he read the letter, knowing that it was just the beginning. The ripples of change were spreading. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. But Hollow Creek had shown that anything was possible, and now the message was starting to spread beyond the borders of their town. The train wasn't just a vehicle for transportation. It had become a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of community, and a living example that the impossible could be made possible. Sam looked out at the tracks in front of him, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. This wasn't just about saving a town, it was about creating a movement. And Hollow Creek had started something that could never be undone. The momentum that Hollow Creek had started was beginning to gather speed. What once seemed like an impossible dream, a network of self-sustaining, thriving small towns, was becoming a reality. More towns were reaching out for help, eager to implement the same changes Sam had championed in Hollow Creek. What had started with one train, one dream, was now a movement. And Sam, along with the people of Hollow Creek, were at the heart of it. The phone calls came daily. Sam and the team were constantly traveling, visiting towns like Clearwater, Pine Ridge, and Riverton. Each town had its own challenges, its own set of obstacles to overcome. Some were dealing with economic decline, others with aging populations or shrinking industries. But the common thread was clear. All of them were tired of waiting for someone else to fix their problems. They were ready to take their futures into their own hands. For Sam, the work was grueling, but it was also incredibly rewarding. Every town he visited reminded him of Hollow Creek's journey. They were all starting from a place of doubt, unsure whether they had the strength or the resources to turn things around. But with every success, no matter how small, he could see the change in their eyes, the spark of hope that had been lit. He knew it was only a matter of time before they, too, would begin to believe that they could rebuild. However, with the growth of the movement came the inevitable complications. As more towns joined, the stakes grew higher. There were more people to organize, more resources to manage, and more interests to balance. Sam couldn't do it alone, no matter how much he wanted to. He needed help, not just from the people of Hollow Creek, but from those in the other towns who had embraced his vision. Martha, ever the steady presence, had taken on a leadership role in organizing and coordinating the efforts across the towns. She was Sam's right hand, helping to handle logistics, secure funding, and keep everyone on track. But as the movement grew, even she could see that they needed to expand their team. One evening, as Sam sat at his desk, reviewing plans for the next phase of their work, Martha walked in holding a stack of papers. "We've got a problem," she said, setting the papers down in front of him. Sam raised an eyebrow. "What's going on?" "Riverton," she began. "They've got a problem with the railroad. It's more than just a few broken tracks. The whole line's outdated. They've got an aging station and they're struggling with permits. We're gonna need a lot of support to make it happen." Sam sighed, rubbing his temples. "I was afraid this would happen. As much as I want to keep helping these towns, we're running out of resources." Martha nodded, sitting down beside him. "We need a bigger network, Sam. If we're going to keep going, we need to bring in more people, more experts, more volunteers, more funding. We can't do it with just the people from Hollow Creek anymore." Sam leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. It wasn't just about fixing the tracks or restoring the train stations. It was about building a foundation that would last. A foundation that could sustain itself long after they were gone. The future of the movement, of the towns, depended on it. "I know," Sam said finally. "We've got to take this to the next level. We need to find partners, businesses, organizations, even local government that can help support these projects long term." That night, Sam and Martha began to brainstorm ways to expand the movement. They created a plan to establish a network of community leaders and organizations that could take the initiative to help with the reconstruction of towns. They reached out to nonprofits, local businesses, and even larger philanthropic organizations that might be interested in investing in the town's futures. It wasn't just about fixing the train tracks anymore. It was about creating sustainable economies, revitalizing industries, and inspiring entire communities to take charge of their destinies. As the days passed, the network started to take shape. Hollow Creek became the flagship for this new movement, the place where people came to learn, to witness what was possible, and to take those lessons back to their own towns. Sam started holding workshops, bringing in experts to teach people how to restore their economies, fix aging infrastructure, and even build sustainable local businesses that would generate jobs for years to come. Riverton was the first to sign on for this new phase of the project. They had a long way to go, but Sam and the team helped them secure funding, recruit volunteers, and bring in the right resources. With Hollow Creek's success as proof, Riverton felt a renewed sense of possibility. As the train station was repaired and the tracks replaced, It was like watching the town wake up from a long slumber. It wasn't just about fixing what was broken anymore. It was about building something better, something sustainable. Sam wasn't just restoring the past, he was creating a future for these towns. A future where they didn't have to rely on outside forces to dictate their destiny. A future where they could stand on their own 2 feet, proudly, confidently. But even as the network grew and the movement spread, Sam knew that the challenges would only intensify. There would be more towns, more people, more obstacles to overcome. The road ahead was uncertain. Yet, with every step, with every new partnership, the belief in their mission grew stronger. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings with new partners and supporters, Sam stood outside the train station in Hollow Creek, watching the sun begin to set. The town had changed so much over the years. The streets were filled with life. The air was full of hope. It was hard to believe that just a few years ago, this place had been on the brink of collapse. "Hey," Martha called out, walking up beside him. "What's on your mind?" Sam looked out at the train tracks, the very same tracks that had carried the dreams of Hollow Creek forward. "I'm thinking about all the towns that still need our help. We've come so far, but we're just getting started." Martha smiled, understanding the weight of his words. "You know, Sam, you've already changed so many lives, and you're just getting started. Hollow Creek is proof of what's possible when people come together. It's a beacon for the future." Sam nodded, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. "We've only scratched the surface. The journey's far from over. But if we keep going, if we keep believing, there's no limit to what we can achieve." As the train rumbled down the tracks, heading toward a future full of promise, Sam felt the weight of the years of hard work, the struggles, the victories, and for the first time, he truly believed that the movement, the vision, would endure. It would outlast them all because it wasn't just about a town or a train or even a dream. It was about the spirit of people who refused to give up, who believed in something greater than themselves. And that, Sam knew, was something no one could take away. The movement that Hollow Creek had started had now become something much larger than anyone had ever imagined. It was no longer just about revitalizing the small town or saving a train. It was about transforming entire communities. What Sam and the people of Hollow Creek had done had sparked a revolution, a movement built on the belief that communities could not only survive but thrive by relying on their own strength, vision, and unity. And now, more than ever, it felt like the whole world was watching. As the days turned into months, Sam and the team continued their work with tireless determination. They had expanded the movement to dozens of towns, each with its own challenges, but each united by the same purpose. The people of Hollow Creek had become mentors, guiding these towns through the process of revitalization. And every time they helped a new town breathe life into its streets, Sam couldn't help but feel the incredible sense of pride that came from knowing that this was just the beginning. But with success came new challenges. While the towns they helped flourished, the larger cities and corporate interests that had once attempted to shut Hollow Creek down were beginning to take notice. They had underestimated Sam and his movement from the very start. Now they saw the growing influence that Hollow Creek had, and they weren't happy about it. They knew that if more towns followed Hollow Creek's example, it could disrupt the power dynamics in entire regions. It wasn't long before the opposition began to regroup. The same corporate giants that had tried to buy out Hollow Creek and control its railroad now started to push for stricter regulations. They used their influence to sway public opinion, painting Hollow Creek's movement as a threat to modern development. They spread rumors that the towns being revitalized were struggling financially, that they were nothing more than glorified tourist attractions. The whispers grew louder. They wanted to stop this movement before it gained any more momentum. Sam wasn't one to back down. He knew that every victory they had achieved had come with a fight, but now the stakes were higher. This wasn't just about saving a few small towns. It was about fighting for a future where communities weren't just at the mercy of outside forces. It was about proving that small towns could be powerful, independent, and self-sustaining. The pressure mounted as legal battles and media campaigns intensified. But Sam wasn't alone. The people of Hollow Creek and the other towns they had helped rallied around him. There was a sense of solidarity, of unity that ran deep through the movement. It was no longer just about fighting for a train or a town. It was about standing up for what was right, for the future of small communities everywhere. One day, after a particularly intense week of meetings, Sam sat alone in his office, looking over the plans for the next phase of the movement. He had been on the road so much, meeting with towns, organizing events, and trying to keep everything together. He was tired, more tired than he had ever been, and the weight of the world felt heavier than ever before. But then, as if on cue, there was a knock at the door. He didn't have to look up to know who it was. It was Martha, as always, the steady force that kept him grounded. "You're wearing yourself thin," she said softly, stepping into the room and sitting across from him. "We've got this, Sam. We've done it before, and we can do it again." Sam let out a long sigh. "I know, but it feels different this time. The pressure's building, and the bigger the movement gets, the harder it becomes to keep it all together. I'm worried we might lose sight of why we're doing this." Martha smiled gently. "Sam, you're not alone in this. None of us are. Hollow Creek, the towns we've helped, the people we've inspired, they all believe in what we're doing. They believe in you. This is more than just your fight. This is our fight." Her words hit Sam harder than he expected. He had been so focused on the weight of the responsibility that he had forgotten one of the most important lessons he had learned. This wasn't just about one person. This was about a community, a movement of people, all working together toward a common goal. "You're right," Sam said quietly, looking up at Martha. "I've been so wrapped up in the challenges that I've lost sight of how far we've come. I can't do this without all of you, without everyone." Martha's eyes softened. "We've already proven that when people come together, anything is possible. Hollow Creek is just the beginning. You've already changed so many lives, Sam. Don't forget that." As the words sank in, Sam felt a renewed sense of clarity. The fight was far from over, and it was going to get even harder before it got easier. But he didn't have to face it alone. He had the strength of the entire movement behind him. The next few weeks were pivotal. The media campaign against the movement reached its peak. Corporate interests pushed harder, using every tactic at their disposal. They tried to cast doubt on the viability of the towns they had helped, spreading misinformation and attacking the people involved. But Hollow Creek supporters didn't back down. They organized protests, rallied support through social media, and most importantly, they told their stories. They shared the success stories of the towns that had been revived. They showed the world that Hollow Creek wasn't just a one-off success, it was a blueprint for the future. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. Public opinion started to shift. People began to understand that this wasn't about nostalgia or a return to the past. It was about creating a future where communities could take control of their own destinies. In the end, the movement's momentum proved unstoppable. The opposition's tactics, though powerful, couldn't erase the truth of what was happening in these small towns. People were waking up. They were realizing that they didn't have to wait for permission to change their lives. And they were beginning to see that the future didn't have to be defined by the interests of a few powerful corporations. It could be defined by the dreams of the people. Sam and the team had done it. Hollow Creek and the towns they helped were proof that when communities came together, they could accomplish the impossible. And the movement continued to spread, growing stronger every day. As the final battle played out in the courts and press, the victory was undeniable. Hollow Creek had proven that it was possible to reclaim their future, to rebuild and thrive. The movement wasn't just alive, it was flourishing. Sam looked out over the bustling town square of Hollow Creek, now a vibrant hub of activity. The train rumbled down the tracks, its whistle sounding a triumphant note. He had built something much bigger than a train. He had built a legacy that would continue for generations to come. And for the first time in a long while, Sam felt at peace. The fight wasn't over, but it had already been won.